and welcome back to Video Drones. Last week I couldn't make a video because Nick was really unwell, and unfortunately he has been in hospital for a few days and he's back home, but he's still not very well, which is a bummer, but he'll get there. Though luckily we have Noah, my son, who's also part of Moira Mother, our band, and you're doing a project.
Yeah, so I had to do a film analysis, so I thought it would be the perfect thing to do, and I've chosen to do Heavenly Creatures as my film, because it's a really amazing film, and I mean it's a local story, which just makes it even more kind of spectacular. It makes it more interesting.
Yes, it really does. And Noah wasn't so keen on our name, Moira Mother. He was like, I don't know about that. But then once we showed you Heavenly Creatures, yeah, you were quite blown away with it, weren't you?
It's an amazing film, and Peter Jackson did a really good job with it. Yeah, his storytelling. I mean, I'd say it's better than like the Lord of the Rings films.
Yeah, I reckon. I'm not a big fan of the Lord of the Rings. I know there's probably like, you're not supposed to say that being Kiwi, but it's not really.
I mean, it's cool. It's really cool.
I mean, some people
I'm
love
not
it.
like fanatic about it, you know.
No. Peter Jackson, well, before he did Heavenly Creatures, it's quite strange. When I heard he was making a film about this murder, I thought, well, this Moira, I thought, I don't know, how's that going to go down? Because before that, he'd done Brain Dead and Bad Taste and Meet the Feebles.
Silly films.
They're really low
fun.
budget, very gory, all comedy. Meet the Feebles is truly disgusting. I saw it when I was quite young and I wish I hadn't. It's really disturbing. It's like puppets that get like venereal diseases and it's just foul. It's like, it's not, you think, oh, it's just cute, they're puppets. No, it's not. There's nothing innocent about it. And then, I think the first one he did, which was Bad Taste, is about aliens and they're like drinking vomit.
Yeah, I saw about that.
You saw some of that?
And they're crawling around with giant heads that are really messed up.
It's so messed up.
Funny though.
It's crazy, but it's amazing. They made it on next to nothing, and Peter Jackson's actually a main character in it.
Yeah, he fights himself.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's disgusting. It's just truly disgusting, but it's quite fun and really, really creative. And then Brain Dead, it had a different name, I think, for American release, but that actually was a really big hit. It's a zombie one, which I love.
I saw that one, the priest scene where it's, I kick ass for the Lord. Boom.
Yeah, it's got some really funny. It's great, and it's the practical effects are amazing, and it's honestly one of the great zombie movies. Oh, and then he did The Frighteners. Did he do that before or after Heavenly Creatures? I can't remember. That was actually set in Littleton, which is just over the hill from us. Yeah, The Frighteners. It's got Michael J. Fox in it. So it was kind of, I can't remember if that became before or after. It's actually quite a good film, The Frighteners. It's got a few scary moments. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Heavenly Creatures is the best thing that Peter Jackson's ever done, which may get some backlash, but I don't care. I'm just, not that into fantasy, I guess.
Yeah. And yeah, so today we're going to do like an analysis on it. We're going to talk about kind of the themes of it, and like the history behind it, because it is a horror like romance thriller. So like, even though the actual case they weren't apparently like that like romantic, like he kind of like
he embellished that.
Yeah, he embellished that.
But then again, I was reading that there wasn't any confirmation that they didn't have a romantic relationship until about 2006. So at the time of making the film, it was assumed that these girls were in a homosexual relationship. But it's not necessarily true. I mean, there was a lot of like publicity around this like lurid murder, lesbian school children kind of like, papers are, they're really sensationalist. But they did have an intensely intimate connection with each other and were kind of obsessed with each other. That doesn't necessarily mean they were actually sexually involved. They were just very, very, very close. So that part of the film may or may not have any kind of connection to reality. But
yeah, it still made the film more like intense and dramatic. And I think they definitely might have had some attachment issues and stuff. Yeah,
they were very, very attached, like almost addicted to each other's presence.
Yeah, it would make sense for them to like have some kind of intense feelings, like definitely kind of love. Like it doesn't have to be sexual, but like love to be able to like enter that fourth world they call it.
Yes, so that's all based on fact. The really interesting about Heavenly Creatures, we're not going to review it as such. I mean, because if you haven't seen it, we will give you some spoilers in this. It's more of an analysis of the film, but we will rate it. I do recommend you see it. So yeah, the amazing thing is that it's these two girls from Christchurch, New Zealand. One was actually born in England and was just living here because her father got work for the University of Canterbury. So we've got Juliette Hulme, and she's played by Kate Winslet. That was her first ever role. And Melanie Lynskey, Kiwi actress, she's amazing, and she plays Pauline Parker, the other girl in this situation. So we've got Juliette Hulme and Pauline Parker. They are the central figures of this whole sort of story. We actually have Pauline's diaries, and so much of what was in the film comes from these diaries and comes from what the family and friends were saying. So it's very, very, very close to reality. So these girls, they met in high school. They both had terrible health problems. Paul suffered from like a bone marrow infections.
All the best people have bad chests and
bone diseases. It's frightfully romantic.
And they could have kind of kickstarted like their trauma, and that could be kind of the reason for some of the stuff they did. They both had that much trauma.
They both had a lot of trauma.
They've been deserted. Like Julie had been deserted by her parents, and when she was sick.
Yes, Juliette felt like her. Well, apparently, I've been doing some reading around this, and Juliette's mother wasn't particularly maternal. She liked male attention, and she wasn't very motherly. So when Juliette would get sick, she was just kind of abandoned for long periods of time. And Juliette came from a very wealthy background, whereas Pauline did not. But yeah, that didn't really seem to matter about their friendship. But so Paulette had TB, which is a terrible sort of chest lung infection, and that would come and go throughout her life. So they call it trauma bonding these days. When people meet and they have a shared trauma, it's like they create this intense connection with each other based on the traumas that they have suffered. But then they both started to consider themselves a lot better than other people. They created their own religion with their own set of morality in it.
Yeah, this really seems like they have some kind of like mental illness, like maybe like bipolar, even with, or like some, like it seemed like they got very egotistical when they were together like that.
Yeah, it's it's called a folie,
deux,
which is like a sort of the madness of two. It's a sort of phenomenon.
Like shared delusion kind of thing.
A shared delusion. So the intensity of their friendship. But I also think we like when you're young, when you're 15, 16, and they met when they were probably about 14 maybe, you kind of are a bit crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of hormones.
There's a lot of hormones, and your brain's still developing, and you haven't really established yourself in the world apart from, and you're still trying to separate yourself from your parents and understand yourselves. So I think that there's kind of a madness that goes on with being a teenager anyway, and it can manifest in different ways. But it was just the fate aligned for these two to meet each other. And they were very, very productive, very creative. They would write poems and plays and stories. Their religion, they loved cinema. They adored it. We love cinema too. We're kind of nuts about that. I always have been. But they developed part of their religion. Their saints from their religion were based on some of these
characters.
movie characters, opera singers.
Stars.
They loved Mario Lanza. And that's a big part of the film. There's these glorious scenes where they're sort of running around and sort of out these beautiful outfits and pretending to be princesses. And eventually they actually believe they start to see this other dimension called the fourth world. And they really believe that they see the fourth world and that they can sometimes access it, but it's only because of their spiritual connection.
I wonder what that was drawn from. Because to say that you've seen a fourth world, like maybe it's just like the feelings, like the endorphins and stuff like that. But that's separate from saying I've seen the fourth world. It's a different thing.
Lots of religious people say that they've seen things.
Oh, right. It could just be like delusions, like they kind of just hallucinating at that point because they've set up this idea, and they had this like intense connection, and they have all this mental illness, and they have all this like hysteria together, and maybe they just had this like kind of shared delusional hallucination kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, because, it's an unusual religion, but you could argue that any religion is quite unusual. And most religious people tend to, well, not all religious people, but a lot of the great religious people, they've had visions. They've had gods talk to them, and they've seen things, and the skies opened up and a chariot of fire came down. So it could be an example of that kind of mentality at play. And
even if just one saw it, like, because it kind of seems like that Pauline was kind of the one who was like more into this because she was the one writing all the diaries and stuff. Like she kind of believed them more. Maybe if she had just seen it, then Juliette would have gone along. She would have I see it too.
It's hard to say which one came up with it first because Juliette actually, when she grew up, became a really massively successful best-selling crime novelist. So she commits this crime, and she goes on to have a huge career writing about crimes, detective stories, which is kind of quite surreal, really, when you think about it. But she had changed her name by this stage, and it wasn't like anyone could really figure out what her identity was. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting story, and props to Peter Jackson, because like we've said, his other films were quite sensational, really gory, really over the top. They were more comedies, but there's none of that present in Heavenly Creatures, except perhaps the visual aspect of when they see the fourth world, and some of the kind of intense, like really close-in shots of the doctor's mouth when he's saying, oh, he thinks they've got homosexuality. Like, it was such a big deal. I thought that being gay was...
Thunder strike, lightning strikes.
Yes, they had some really good effects like that. And of course, there's the fantasy scenes, so both girls would sort of make these clay figurines and act out these sort of big, like, whole battles and lives, and they had these really elaborate stories for their characters.
There's all those warping shots when they were in the garden, like in the fourth world, like everything was warping and changing and stuff.
Yes.
And the butterflies flying past.
The huge butterflies.
The CGI.
It was a big deal because it was quite. It was made in 1994, so yeah, CGI was still coming about, and that was what Peter Jackson sort of became known for. But I remember when it came out, everyone was really excited, like, oh, it looks so amazing! Look at these crazy effects. It was a really big deal.
Yeah, they did a good job with it too. It was like well done.
Yeah, it's actually so well done, and he hasn't resorted to like mockery or comedy or like unnecessary horror at all.
Yeah, it really fit what it was and the theme he was going for.
Yeah, it's very, very tasteful, which is unusual for him. But I think he felt a real connection to these girls. The murder actually occurred in 1954. So the movie was made in 1994, but it looks just like the 50s. It's amazing seeing. They used this Ferrymead Park, which is a park you can go to. You can pay to visit it, and they have like little trains and stuff. And it's all set up like something out of another era, but they managed to change that around a bit as one of the big like set places. So it looks like you're set in the 50s. And to be honest, there's a lot of places in Christchurch that look like they could still be from another era. So
something outdated.
Yeah, they're quite. We've got some really amazing neo-Gothic architecture which fit in really well. Of course, a lot of that was destroyed in the earthquake, so it's actually quite beautiful, really, to have this sort of time capsule of what some of Christchurch looked like before the earthquakes. But I think he felt Peter Jackson had a real sort of empathy for these girls, because I imagine he must have grown up knowing about that case somewhat. And basically the girls were just villainized. Everyone just didn't try to understand it. They said,
they're evil.
They just said that they were evil, and that was that. These girls are evil. And I don't think Peter believed that, and I think he wanted to challenge that concept and he wanted to sort of explain why they were the way they were, like what the attitudes of the time were. And boy, he really does extremely good job of making you empathize for these girls, understanding the larger story, understanding the factors at play. Because
they are the protagonists of the film, and like you're rooting for them, and like at the end when you see those black and white shots of them being like torn apart, you really feel for them, because you see what could have been if they had just been allowed to stay together. Yeah, the whole like, I mean, their friendship was. Their parents were a little concerned about the nature of the friendship, but they still allowed them to sort of be friends. But there came a time where Juliette's father was fired from his job and he had to move, and the mother was having an affair. So they decided to send Juliette to South Africa for her TB, because it's a hot, dry climate. And just that's what really brought them to a point where they thought that murder was the only route, that they had to stay together, and they had to stay together. Both of them would get very unwell when they were away from the other. They really had these strong sort of physical responses to being separate from one another. So they believed that Pauline would be allowed to go with Juliette to South Africa and stay with relatives of Paulette's, but they didn't think that Honora, Pauline's mother, would let them. So they made her the focus of. They decided that she was the one reason keeping them apart. She was the one person keeping them apart, which wasn't necessarily true. Both the parents, really. Both sides. It was both sides of the parents. But for some reason, they focused in on Honora, who was, Pauline's mother. And so they devised it was a premeditated murder. It was very well thought out. They set her up. They smashed her brains in up at Victoria Park, which is about a 15-minute drive. Beautiful spot, and every time I go there and I walk that path, I think about what happened on that path, because it really was a shocking case.
But the film is really beautiful, and it's so beautiful and so fantastical, and it mixes reality with fantasy so well, and it makes you feel like you really are experiencing what they experience.
Yeah, and like with the way they drop the crystal crystal gem on the ground, it kind of really alludes to that kind of fantasy they were in, because like it would kind of symbolize like this part of their fantasy, the narrative that they were creating.
Yeah, they dropped like a crystal sort of gem on the ground and asked their mother to, so what's that? So she would bend down and pick it up and look at it. And while she was bending down and picking it up, they took a brick out of this, they wrapped it up in newspaper and they put it in a stocking.
Yeah.
A stocking, yeah,
really?
It was a stocking. And they both took turns beating her brains in while they got her to lean down and look at this crystal. And yeah, the fact that they did use this gem to distract the mother, it fits into their fantasy really well.
And they didn't really like realize, like they couldn't really differentiate what was real. They didn't realize what they'd done until like much later.
Well, yeah, there was one report saying that Pauline, it took her 5 years to really realize what she'd done. So she would have been about 20 by then. They were 15 and 16 when this happened. I do think that they struggled to differentiate reality from fantasy. I don't think that they were completely delusional necessarily, though. I think it was more of like a temporary insanity created by both of them. It's a fascinating psychological kind of condition that was created. Also, we've got to think they lived in a really restrictive time where people were scared of homosexuality, and it was a very, very, oh my god, Christchurch is still so conservative, so you can only imagine what it was like in the 50s. So they really lived in a very tight, strange little, very restrictive world, and this was a way for young women to kind of, explore beyond that. And I don't really know. There's reports that after the murder, so the final scenes of the movie, it goes from this very whimsical, quite lovely film with moments of horror and strangeness. The final scene is so abrupt and so brutal, and actually it's the final scenes are shown at the very start as well, which isn't really effective. It's very, very good technique.
It's top and tailing.
Yeah, really, they sort of they start off with this really intense moment and then sort of dissolve back into how they began their friendship, how they met, and then it ends up with that again. But it's so abrupt. Even though you've seen that scene occur at the very start, it still feels like it's brand new, really. It's devastating. And yeah, the idea that they sort of have this dream sequence where they're being torn apart, and it's really, really emotional. It's hard not to be moved. So Peter Jackson really achieved something remarkable in that in this film, he challenged the views of these girls being this sort of standard way, and they were just evil monsters, and really paints them as the people, the children that they really were. So I think he really did something quite amazing for the women involved in this case. And yeah, they both went to prison for 5 years each, and apparently they weren't supposed to ever see each other again, but that may or may not be true, but I don't believe that they did actually reconnect. It would have been interesting if they had reconnected.
I feel like maybe they did in secret. Because they were
I'd like to
so
think that.
in the film, and obviously in real life too. Because as you can see, but like they were so connected, and they so wanted to be together. But I wonder if they would have changed after 5 years, and they would have realized that they can't really be together.
I think that they were probably more likely to realize that they just couldn't see each other again.
But I feel like they would, like, it wasn't really that. It was just because they were being separated that's why they killed her. Not. Yeah,
that's true. Maybe it's a really complex.
So the problem is that they're together, or the problem is that they're apart.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. It's a bit of a oxymoron, isn't it? Oxymoron.
Conundrum.
It's a real conundrum. And I mean, yes, they did actually murder someone. It was a terrible, terrible crime. But I don't really think they realized what they were doing, the reality of this murder. I don't think that they were actually able to be aware of how real it was, because they were so young, and they were so obsessed with each other, and their religion that they invented had a very different kind of morality. I mean, it says in Pauline's diary, she said, like, hundreds, thousands of people die every day. Why can't mother be one of them? And I just don't think they really realize how
real that is.
Yeah, and what murdering someone actually means. I don't think it really clicked to them what they'd actually done, because they're so mired in this fantasy. I think to them, murdering someone was just the same as
squishing a bug. Yeah,
just this thing that they did. And I do think it probably took a long time for them to actually understand and accept what they'd really done. So I have a lot of empathy for these girls. I think obviously what they did was wrong, But I do think the circumstances and the time that they lived in had a lot to do with what happened. So yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of empathy for them. I think it's a really tragic story, especially for the mother and the family involved when she actually died. It's very, 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 very sad. And funnily enough, both girls went on to become very religious in different religions. So there was something in them that needed that. They needed to have something from the outside, sort of telling them what was right, what was wrong. That I don't know if they were necessarily able to create their own morality naturally themselves.
Yeah, they didn't have really much alternatives in that time. There wasn't any like philosophies they could like go to. It was just religion or whatever the hell they made up.
yeah, that's true. There wasn't the range of options we have now. They become Pauline became a Roman Catholic, and Juliette Hulme became a member of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. So they both became very religious as they got older. I don't necessarily know if they married or any. I don't know much about what actually happened to them afterwards. But yeah, I can imagine. Well,
they were mainly just hermits, and they just stayed to themselves.
Yeah, well, they had to work, so they did have jobs.
Kate Perry just wrote a book.
Yeah, she wrote a book. It's quite a solitary life, isn't it?
It's interesting that she changed her name, because I feel like she could have gotten a lot of money from keeping her name. Because like a crime novelist who's actually killed someone, I mean. Yeah,
that's pretty crazy, actually, especially when she was so young. But, I mean, then again, I don't think either of them really wanted to be known for what they'd done, and they were trying to really escape that and put a lot of different distance in between each other. They didn't really want to admit that they had a sexual relationship, and, basically Juliette kind of blamed Pauline, but she said, she said she was going to kill herself if I didn't do what she wanted. But who knows? I mean, it's quite hard to say. It seems like they both had a very equal relationship in this murder, from what we can tell. But there's some reports that say some things, some that say others. There's not a heck of a lot known exactly, but we do have the diaries of Pauline, which would be a very, very interesting read. I'd actually be a bit scared to read them because I feel like I go a wee bit crazy reading them. Just sort of,
Well, it's usually the account of the actual person that usually has the clearest view of, at least from their perspective,
Yes, it's their perspective. Gosh, I mean, wasn't it the Scientologists? Their whole religion's based on like a dream that one of their guys had.
Really?
So it'd be funny it'd be interesting. Maybe the fourth world religion could have sort of taken off. You never know. This is how some religions start with very strange origins. So yeah, that's really. And is there anything else to add?
Just it's a really sick film.
Sick as in good?
Yeah. Maybe I should, in film analysis, I should talk a little bit about, because we talked about some of the film techniques, but maybe we could talk a little bit more about the film techniques they used.
Yes, that's a good idea.
Because they used, the lighting they used, they had deep purples and stuff for the romantic scenes, and they did a really good job of, utilizing light to convey a story. And also a really interesting thing is the locations, because I've been to basically all the locations in this film.
Yeah, that's
I had my formal at the Island house.
Yes, that it was shot in. This is crazy. I almost got married at that place to your dad way back in the day. We were considering it, but it had all these stuffed animal heads, and I had my best friends were vegan, and I was like, ugh, I don't know. Yeah, that's the thing. We walk around these places where the film was shot all the time. Yeah, every day. Go up to Victoria Park quite often. I mean, it's a beautiful spot. We've had picnics there, many picnics. So
I've been to Ferrymead tram station on the road on. Yeah,
you have been. Yeah, we've seen. I went to the little theatre that they shot. There's a little theatre at the Ferrymead Park that I went to. So it is one of those rare films for us that's shot in Christchurch and is recognisable as Christchurch and is a big part of our history. I even remember when they were auditioning people, and I don't know why, but I didn't audition even though I was doing a lot of acting back then. Can you imagine I could have been an extra?
You could have been Pauline.
Actually, we do look kind of similar. Yeah. We do. I probably could have done that. I could have had a grumpy little teenager. I was already a grumpy little teenager. I probably was a wee bit too young though. I was probably about 13 when they did it, and they were a little bit older. And they did such a great job. And I love Melanie Lynskey. She's great. She's been in some great films.
This doesn't feel like my home anymore.
This doesn't feel like my home anymore. That's right. Yeah, she's in a really good. It's got Elijah Wood.
Yeah.
And she's also been in this show Leather Jackets, which was amazing. Oh, she's really good in that. She's She's
Yellow
fantastic.
Jackets.
Yellow Jackets. What did I say? Leather Jackets.
Yellow Jackets. Similar.
Leather Jackets are nasty wasps. Yeah, Melanie Lynskey's fantastic. And of course, Kate Winslet's amazing as well. Incredible performances from them both.
Yeah.
Peter really knows how to get the most out of his actors.
And it was quite a groundbreaking film because I can't imagine there were that many lesbian films out at the time. And not many people had seen that. People probably didn't even know they existed.
You're right. Maybe for some people it was their first sort of like glimpse into this idea of homosexual love. But it is such a sweet, kind of almost quite a wholesome relationship in a lot of ways.
I saw there was one review on it, and the lady she was lesbian, and that's the first time she ever saw a lesbian relationship, and that kind of helped her through her process. So
Gosh,
it's
that's
kind of a great
interesting.
film.
Wow, that's really cool.
So it's just done a lot of things, you know. It's got like Christchurch on the map, New Zealand on the map.
Yes.
It's just done a lot of things for a lot of people, and like it's telling a very kind of gruesome story, but in like a really beautiful way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's the most gruesome story, but it is a beautiful film. I think it was nominated for an Oscar for best screenplay.
Should have won. Oh, because it's a play as well.
Is it a play as well?
Yeah, it started off as a play, I think.
No way.
I think it's called
Really?
Pictures of Heaven. Yeah.
So it was a play before it was a movie.
Yeah, I think he wrote the play and then he turned it into a movie.
That's pretty cool.
My friend performed it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I could have seen that. Man, that would have been good.
Let me go into to be in.
It'd be a really intense one to be in.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You'd have to be really careful that you didn't get too caught up in the character and start losing your mind.
I think it had like more, it was more truthful and it had more like excerpts and stuff in it.
Oh, more of the diary entries and things like that. Oh, wow. I would love to see that. That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's strange. It's so strange to walk up in those hills and think, yep, there was a woman murdered, moited.
Moited
Right there. That's where she was moited. And yeah, just the effect it had on me as a teenager. It came out when I was 13, 14. I remember watching it with my friends. And one of actually Alison, my best friend, she looks so much like Melanie Lynskey. And she's kind of sulky like her too. So it was like freaky. It was like, wow, that's just
that's why she's going to watch it. It looks like Alison.
It does look like Alison. Yeah, Melanie Lynskey and my friend Alison look way more similar than me and Melanie Lynskey. They actually look like they could be sisters. It's a little bit freaky.
Maybe they're related somehow.
They could be. Well, I think it's a small place, isn't it, Christchurch? But yeah, to have a film like that that's on this international scale, it's pretty interesting. You feel this weird sort of, is it a pride? It's like it's a kind of a pride, like to be associated our city with this amazing film, and it's kind of a sadness that we're associated with this terrible murder because we don't have a lot of really high profile murders.
No,
not a lot.
Not that people know of.
Yeah, well, there's always murders going on. And sometimes I'll find a body under a house. Actually, there was a body found under a house right next to my old high school.
Oh.
That was a bit grim. There's definitely there's definitely crimes going on, but that was a very unusual case.
Yeah, it had a whole narrative to it.
Plus, they were so young. They were young girls, which is an unusual people to murder someone. And yeah, they went on to have quite normal lives, so I don't think they were insane. Actually, when they tried to use the folie deux argument in their trial, and that's only the second time in all of history at that stage, I don't know, since then, where they'd tried to use that argument. And I think in that case, it actually would have been a really good argument. But the courts were just too focused on them being villainous, evil little homosexual girls.
Because they're just demons. It's nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah, they didn't really want to investigate the thought processes behind it or have any kind of empathy. But when girls that young do something like that, that's unusual. You've got to look into it. But I actually found out that it was good that they didn't get the insanity plea at the trial, because if they had been decreed insane,
Gels in the brain.
They probably would have been lobotomized, and it's Christchurch mental health system is terrible now. It's been really terrible for a long time, but in the 50s it was even worse. So poor old Janet Frame, one of our most famous writers, she had electroshock therapy. She came very close to being lobotomized, and she's one of our most famous writers. So in a way it was really good that they didn't get given the insanity diagnosis or whatever, because that could have completely ruined their lives. And because they were under 18, they didn't get the death sentence. So they just served 5 years, and then they went on their own ways.
I mean, that's a fair treatment. 5 years, that's hardly any time at all for murder.
I know, yeah. So I think that there was some empathy. I don't know. Maybe it was just because of their age that they only got 5 years.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's fair because they weren't like real murderers, you know. They were very young and they didn't really know what was real. So it was just different. And once I thought it was 5 years of like being in prison, you know, thinking about it, probably like, oh yeah, shit, that was probably not the best idea.
Maybe you shouldn't have done that.
Probably won't do that again.
Yeah, and apparently the prison that Pauline was in was dreadful. It was cold and full of rats, and it was Auckland prison in the 50s. It would have been really awful. And yeah, I do think there's a lot of evidence suggesting that they were at the very least, completely delusional at the time of the murder. So yeah, I do think it's a bit more complex than them just being evil. And I find it fascinating to look into the psychology and the backgrounds of people who have done actions like this, just to find out a little bit more about them, because I don't think it is that simple. There are some people who are just straight up sociopaths and psychopaths that are young and they'll kill other children or other people for various reasons, but they genuinely are, you know, genuinely psychopathic or sociopathic. And I don't really believe that these girls kind of were necessarily those sorts of people. I think it was just, yeah, a really unfortunate series of events in a very conservative time. So yeah, should we rate it?
Yeah. What do you rate it?
It's hard. It's between a 4 and a 5 hearts.
Oh, so it's out of 5.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then we added it up together.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, 8's my favorite number, and it's one of my favorite films. So if I do 4, I need to 4 in the same.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Okay, 4 out of 5 hearts for both of us, which makes 8.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 hearts for this film. I think that's
Nice.
a really good solid number. I love 8 too. Yeah, I like 38.
Oh yeah, why 38?
Because I like 3s and I like 8s.
Yeah, and 8's are infinite.
Infinite, but then like 3's kind of like a half of an 8.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. So it's not quite. Numbers are so funny to look at, aren't they? Oh, well, that was great having you on here, Noah.
Yeah, it's great being on.
And Noah has his own podcast.
Yep.
What's it called again?
No, but it's like KNOW. So it's like the more you know.
The more you know. No. KNOW 3 times, and that's on Plains FM.
Yep.
And you also upload it to Facebook.
Yep.
When you remember to.
Yeah.
It's a great podcast. It's a philosophy podcast, and there's lots of fantastic interviews. So I'd really recommend checking that out. And we're also going to be making a playlist because me and Noah are way more into... Nick's more of a... He likes some TV, but he's quite snobby about it. Whereas me and Noah love TV as well. And
Love a good show.
Yeah, love a good show, and we'll try to watch them together. So we've got The Leftovers and 6 Feet Under that we're going to talk about at some stage. But yeah, until Nick gets better, I guess Noah's going to be my what would I call you? Not co-host, because we're both hosting. Is that what you call a co-host?
I don't know. It'd be like
My film buddy.
film AD, camera AD.
Camera AD. Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Noah's going to edit this video for us. So yay, that's going to be really fun. Oh well, thanks for tuning in. I guess we'll see if Nick can do next week. We'll do Deep Waters. That was just the weirdest film. But the director is amazing. So yeah, Adrian Lyne, he's known for his 90s psychosexual sort of thrillers. But yeah, we'll wait till Nick gets better. And if Nick's not better, we'll do another film, I guess.
Yeah. And make sure to check out our music. It's going to keep coming out.
Yes, we've had to take a little break because of COVID.
And sickness, and I sprained my hand.
And he sprained his hand, so he can't exactly drum. But we're going to get back on track. It's going to happen. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. It's been nice to see you all. Go see Heavenly Creatures if you haven't already.
It's good.
Yeah. See ya.
8 out of
Bye.
10.